So, Blessed Sunday, once again, allow me to continue my reflection on God is love. Now, allow me to explore more the word caritas or charity. So, we say that from human love, it develops into divine love, which we call agape, and now acting it out is what we call charity or caritas. So, when we talk about faith, faith is our response to that love. Saint Teresa or Calcutta made it clear that faith in action is love, and love in action is charity. So therefore, charity should be taken in the context of faith, a deep encounter with God, and love that is truly radiating of God. In other words, caritas should be in the context of the way we love God and how we are united to God, who is love. That's why faith is the starting point. So caritas also is a way of spiritual communion. So union with Christ is also union with all those to whom He gives Himself. That's why we cannot separate or departmentalize love of God and love of one's neighbor. Because some would think that there are two commandments. So Pope Benedict would like to stress that we cannot separate the two commandments. Either you don't love God and hate your neighbor, or you love God and love your neighbors. So these are simply one entity together. So therefore, the more you love God, the more you love your neighbor. I cannot possess God just for myself. I cannot belong to Him only in union with all those who have become or who will become His own, because love of God and love of neighbor are now truly united with caritas. That is what we mean by a way of spiritual communion. So to love, then, is the recognition that the other is a person who bears the image and likeness of God. So could you imagine that to love is to see and recognize that the other is the person that bears the image and likeness of God. And without faith, you cannot recognize them. And even more so, as he writes, the faith of every person commands us to love, because from it shine forth the face of God, who is love. So imagine the face of a person is also the face that we recognize the face of God. So only when we look at people in this way can we realize that God and love are not merely words. They are person. Then we shall cease to talk about God or love, but we simply act out with acts of service to our neighbor. Seeing with the eyes of Christ, we can give others much more than just outward necessities, but we can then give them the look of love which they care. For example, what do I mean by this? We thought that simply giving limos or hinabang sa makabus is enough for them to be happy. But we fail to see deep within that all these basic materials that we provide for them is not the main thing that sometimes they crave. They want the look of love. They want the giver to be giver in the context of love. That's why they hunger not only for basic necessity, but they hunger for people who share to them God's love. So that's why Jesus Christ's salvific mission is the recovery of the meaning of love. His incarnation, passion, death, and resurrection gave us the meaning of God, who is love. Because Jesus' death on the cross hold a far richer meaning than God's late afternoon walk with our first parents, with Adam and Eve. In Jesus Christ, we will understand love no longer as a mere sentiment or will, but a person who lays down his life for a friend. So that's why Christ on the cross is God's love made visible. I remember one time when a student of Father Arevalo, a Jesuit, a great theologian, were asked to draw the picture of God. So they were drawing the face of an old gray-haired God. Tigulang, bunguton, unya ubanon pagyod. And then he said to them, that is not the face of God. The face of God is in the face of Jesus Christ on the cross, because Christ crucified on the cross is the sacrament of what we mean that God is love. So the picture of God is love is not a red heart that we use as a symbol during Valentine's Day. So when we talk about God's love, it is Christ who lays down his life for us on the cross. So that's why in every celebration of the Eucharist, when we celebrate the memorial of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, the whole context of the Eucharistic celebration brings to us the message that God is love. But when we talk about caritas, caritas is love in action. So agape is the experience of divine love. But when we act it out, it becomes charity. That's why agape should be translated into caritas, because love grows through love. One cannot love unless he is first loved. This is the connection of love and service. When you truly love, you cannot do away with service. That's why a saying would goes, you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving or without serving. So caritas, therefore, is practical love or charity. It is not something impersonal or simply giving human aid. It bears the heart of a person who truly loves. That's why the Pope reaffirmed that the church charities must be a witness for Christ in the world. So every church must have a ministry that brings to the people the message that God is love, which we call social concern. I remember one bishop when we were talking together in one of an international convention. He said, all my parishes, if they do not have social concern translated into ministry of charity, so that is not the church which we call the sacrament of God's love. It becomes a business enterprise. So seeing with the eyes of Christ, we can give others much more than an outward necessity but the look of love. That's why Pope Paul VI made it clear that as we are united in Christ through the Eucharist, then we can see others through the eyes of Christ, and we recognize the face of God among others, especially among the marginalized. So we literally participate in God as we participate in the love that is Christ. Christ is with us. Christ is the love that is God, in whom we live and move and have our being. So you cannot imagine how beautiful it is to be a Christian. and how beautiful it is to belong to a religion we call Christianity, because the center of our life is about God's love. And Christ gave us the true definition of what is God's love, translated not only in words during his public ministry, but God, who is love, translated into action. That's why he said, "They will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." So what is our response to this invitation to love? First, the challenge to live the spirituality of stewardship, especially in this year of faith. Two important words, spirituality and stewardship. So what do you mean? What do we mean when we talk about first spirituality? So spirituality could be sometimes complicated when we study it. But in simple understanding, so when we talk about spirituality, it is the way that we respond to the call of God to be with Him in our life every day. Meaning, when you talk about person who is deeply spiritual, it means God is so alive in him. God is so present in him every day of his life. Like our Father Padre Pio, people can sense how alive God in him. It is our way of loving God and others as we follow the leading of the Spirit every moment in our life. So, this union with God, therefore, allows us to love our neighbor more deeply as we are united more closely to God, who is love. So second, we call it stewardship. Stewardship is our way of responding to God's call to be the caretakers of His creation, including ourselves. So it is our way of total surrender to Him, who has an exclusive ownership over all creation in our life. So imagine two important words: spirituality, responding to God's call to live a life in union with Him. And then second, stewardship, the awareness that the blessing, the temporal blessing that we have should be in a way of total surrender to God, who has the exclusive ownership over all creation in our life. Or in simple terms, stewardship. We are nothing but God's steward or caretakers of all this temporal thing we see in this world. So only through the spirituality of stewardship can we act out in charity towards others. So how we can act out with others? I will explore it once again on the third segment and the final segment of my reflection. So we'll have a break, and after a while, I'll explore once again, and I hope you continue to listen for the final and the most important element of my sharing, how to act out in charity.